Really wanted to discuss, we're out here on the cusp of the rut starting. It's October 21st. It's a high of 45 degrees today. You can hear this wind. I think it's a little bit too windy for our set. We're in a blind. It's periods of rain back and forth, and it is supposed to dry out before dark. We're about an hour and a half away from shooting light, end of shooting light. So pretty happy we're out here. I love this time of year, and we're hoping to see some rut cruising towards evening up around this top of the hollow. You know, how can you tell the pre-rut's even begun? And that's something I wanted to discuss today. I want to discuss some signs, but first I want to talk about the dates. You know, we see the pre-rut beginning. In the pre-rut, the rut happens at the same time in your area every single year. Doesn't matter the moon, doesn't matter the weather. Now, weather to me influences daylight activity, but they're still going to be bred. They're still going to come into estrus. Doesn't matter what the weather is. A lot of times I believe that if there's really windy conditions, hot conditions, stormy conditions, just more breeding takes place at night while deer are hunkered down during the day. That's about the only difference. So you can have some seasons where the rut may appear that it just wasn't on this year. Well, the weather is probably pretty crappy. A lot of times the best ruts that I see will have really volatile weather, meaning temperature extremities, wind extremities, direction of wind, conditions, extreme weather conditions, and change. Now, as far as timing of the rut though, it's the same dang time every year. I hope you didn't come here for any secrets, any new information, but around here, southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, you can take this into southern Michigan, northern Ohio, over into northern Pennsylvania, southern New York, over in the Dakotas, probably Nebraska, northern Nebraska, northern Iowa. You'll see some pre-rut activity starting around the 25th of October, give or take a few days. Give or take a few days, because if it's 89 degrees on October 25th, you're not going to see a lot of movement in those states that I talked about. However, if it's a high of 40-some, the winds are cut in half from what they are today. They've had gusts up to 40 miles an hour. And you don't have that extreme weather of rain and everything else. You're going to see good rutting activity if it's on the 22nd of October, the 20th, or the 28th. It really just depends. But there's going to be a decent, appreciable cold front during that time, even if it's 7 or 10 degrees, and you're going to see some activity. Now that transfers down into southern Illinois, maybe southern Iowa, Missouri, southern Indiana, southern Ohio, maybe northern West Virginia, northern Kentucky. You're going to see more of that pre-rut beginning the end of October, early November. And then you can just say, well, that rut for then, from that time on to the start of the pre-rut, you really have about a 2-week period. We notice now that a lot of the activity around here, the 10th of November, really starts to settle down. So if you look at it starting on the 25th, 28th, somewhere around there, about 2 weeks later, it's really starting to calm down. And you look at average date of conception with a lot of the state agencies. For one, they're always varied. You can look at Georgia, and counties are varied. But you look at other states, and just across the state line, it varies drastically by date from northern Kentucky to southern Ohio, for example, or northern Ohio to southern Michigan. That's because a lot of times they're focusing on averages across the entire state, which a lot can change from north to south. But really, they're focusing on averages, including a lot of states, the second rut. So they're not even considering there's a second rut, and that 15-20% of the does might be bred in December versus early November. Even a third rut in some cases, they're just taking an average. So that average, if that makes sense, because you're adding 20% more bucks that are bred in a month later, and then 5% or 7% that are bred a month after that, now you're pulling that average date. So you could have an average date in a state. They'll say, well, the average doe is bred November 10th. Well, that's slanted by several days because it's considering December and January, and that's pulling that average back when really the average date might be the 5th of November. So always consider that. Don't always count on those state agencies. And I've looked at every state, and almost every state is different than the states surrounding it. Kind of a patchwork management of how they actually tabulate rutting data. Bottom line though, it's going to happen at the same time in your area. Why is there a difference in some of the ruts? You know, your buddy 10 miles away is seeing the rut. That's why I hate rut forecasts, because your buddy can say, hey, I'm seeing great rut activity, and it hasn't started yet by me. And you're waiting and you're waiting. You're waiting till November 1st around here. Well, it hasn't started yet. Yeah, it happened somewhere else about a week ago. Started about a week ago. The problem is if you don't have any older bucks, you're not going to see that expression of rubs and scrapes and rutting sign that someone else might see if they have those older bucks. So that's a really big aspect you have to consider. As a buck ages, he exponentially leaves more sign. He'll make hundreds of rubs instead of a half a dozen rubs when he's a year and a half old versus when he's 4 or 5. Every year they're adding more and more. I've watched a mature buck make 30 rubs just in one sitting because he was ticked off at another buck and a doe that was nearby. He just got mad, busted a bunch of brush, a bunch of willows. That's what a mature buck does. It's not what a younger buck does. So when you see that pre-rut, if you have older bucks in the neighborhood, you're going to see that rut begin compared to someone else who doesn't, probably a week to 10 days earlier. And that's why in some areas you're going to think, wow. And then there's some areas where you don't have those older bucks. You're waiting for cruising bucks, and those cruising bucks are going to be more at mid-rut. You have to excuse me looking around because we are hunting. So I keep looking over this way. I can see a big bowl that goes up. It's across the pinch point across this top. And as it's getting later here, we still have about an hour and 15 minutes left of shooting light right around there. I'm expecting potential cruising movement around here between these two bedding areas. So we'll see. But that timing is critical to understand, and then why you're seeing rutting activity versus someone who's not. Rest assured it's going on, you're just missing it. You're just missing it in your location. When I see rutting activity, yeah, you see rubs and scrapes. And there is a lull. You'll see when they first shed velvet, they're making some rubs, even some scrapes, some early scrapes, early September. And when you fast forward into the end of October, when you start getting the pre-rut, that's when they really start displaying a high percentage of their activity, rutting, quote, rutting activity. And really, we see them on mock scrapes. They hit mock scrapes 365, but they're just leaving their preorbital gland scent. You can't even tell they hit the scrape. When they're actually hitting the ground and hoofing it up and scratching it up and making an actual scrape on the ground, that's when it's during that rut. They're aggressively breaking some of our licking branches at that time and that time only. That's when they get aggressive. It's a 10-day to 2-week thing in that middle of the prime rut. So that's when you see an explosion of scrapes, the rut's beginning. Now, when the rut actually is taking place and deer are entering estrus, does are entering estrus, and that's the pre-rut begins, does aren't quite ready. Sometime in there's does getting ready. Pretty soon there's a whole bunch of does that are ready, and almost every buck gets invited to the party because there's an exponentially amount of does that are ever increasing their timing of estrus every single day. So pretty soon, I call it the rut lockdown. Other people do too, but it's right at the end of that pre-rut phase. Rut lockdown hits, and that's when all of a sudden you don't see any scraping activity. And it looks like, someone might look at it like, there's no rut going on, there's no scraping activity, but it was a week earlier. Then, after they breed a doe or two, it becomes difficult, and that's a week later. It's during that primary rut, and that's when they really start to search. And that's when they're either on their feet all day, but that's when I start to see those scrapes open up a little bit more. And then, of course, when you fast forward a month, you get into that secondary rut, you'll see some scraping activity. So sign is one thing. If you want to dive into it a little bit deeper, we hunt a lot of water holes. There's no reason for bucks to hit water holes in the middle of the morning, middle of the afternoon, middle of the day when it's not during the rut, even when it's warm, because they're not really that active. When it gets cold and it's during the rut, they're moving around all over the place and they're getting thirsty. No different than if you were working out in the middle of the winter, it's 15 degrees, you're going to work up a thirst no matter how cold it is. In fact, if you're just sitting inside watching TV, you probably won't work up that much of a thirst sitting in there in warmer temperatures. Hope that makes sense. But when they're moving around a lot, they're going to actually build up a thirst. So we see them hitting our water holes all of a sudden, which it's done over these last few days. They're hitting water holes at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, noon, 1 o'clock. Then you know they're being active. They're getting a little ruddy. They're leaving some rubs and scrapes. They're chasing some does. They're moving around. They're searching. And they're working up a thirst. And that leads to, on trail cameras and even sign, bucks typically go from point A to point B. Now they might have a different, more of a football shape to get there based on the wind a lot of times, but they're going from bedding to feeding. At night they'll move all over the place, exercise their entire home range, but then they'll come back to that bedding area. A lot of times that bedding to food source movement and back is pretty straight. They're not really going out to the side as much. Think about a buck. He's down in a swamp and he's going out to the middle of a hardwoods in a stand of oaks, and that's where he's feeding for, you know, that 2-week period. He's going to go straight in, straight out. As soon as you get to the rut, all of a sudden he's going to the left, going to the right, and he's going back and forth. It becomes more of a T movement instead of an I. He doesn't just go straight in, straight out during daylight. We're talking daylight movement. He goes straight, left, right, back and forth. And we see that around here. We'll have a lot of parallel camera locations, stand locations, mock scrapes that we watch, and they're on those field edges. And all of a sudden we see a buck that we named Junior. There's one this year where Junior's 2 stands over, 3 scrapes over, 4 cameras over. He is a half mile over, and that's happened in the last week. So you know that's starting to happen. Of course, more daylight movement. So those are some things we really look for, those side movements, water holes picking up, stand use or sign left, and then those stands. That gives us the opportunity to go in when we know that rut's taking place, and we'll be able to park ourselves in the morning on the outside of a bedding area and wait for those deer to come back to us. I want to go around food sources, well around, so I'm not spooking deer. That's where they're usually gathered at during the morning hours when you enter a stand. I want to go to the back side of a bedding area, meaning on the opposite side from that food source, blow my scent outside of that bedding area, just touch the edge of that bedding area. And I love bedding area sits when the rut begins. So the rut's about to begin. It's going to happen at the same time. There's a lot of sign that you can use to validate that. You can use your cameras to validate that. You can use the position of those bucks and them going side to side, a lot of times paralleling field edges and going instead of perpendicular. They're going in and out, outside of the rut. They're paralleling the field edge during the rut. So there's a lot of signs. The timing is there. Make sure you watch these weather patterns because we watch them every day. We have over 50 cell cameras that we watch. So we get a really good idea when it's rainy, windy, when the temperatures are extremely high. They're just not moving. And so you can see that. We see that where some nights we'll get hundreds of pictures, and then on a rainy, windy night, we might get 10, and it could be even during the pre-rut or rut. It's just they don't move during times, and they do during others. You need to be out in the woods when they're moving, and not everybody can hunt every single day. Now, we can hunt every single day, any day we want to, but we can't hunt every day. What I mean by that is we still have to work. We have to shoot videos, we have to put videos out, we have to work with partners, sponsors, seed company, everything that we do. So we have to work. And I want to make sure with kids and a busy lifestyle and friends that I want to hang out with, I want to make sure that I'm choosing the best days to hunt. And that all stems back to when I was 18, 20 years old and had 2 weeks of vacation to burn, and that was it. I had to use my time off wisely, and I learned to do so. I learned to hunt by the weather, so I wasn't stressing not only my tree stands, the deer herd, spooking them, but I wasn't stressing things out at work or home with the wife and the kids, family, friends. You can fit it all in, but it pays to be smart, spend more time on the couch, be selective when you go in to hunt. Learn about these deer, watch them, look for these signs. Just don't take it for fact that they do the same thing every single year from this pattern to this pattern. Understand why they're doing it. When you understand the why, then that leads you to understand when the pre-rut and when the rut begins every single year in your area. And understanding that and knowing the flow of the rut from the pre-rut to the rut lockdown, to the peak rut, to the post-rut, and then to the second rut. Once you understand that and why the deer are moving when they do, then those are tools that you can hunt by and fill your tags with and experience consistent success deer hunting for the rest of your life. Yeah, I really appreciate you watching all the way to the end. Your followers really appreciate and taking the time. I wanted to mention We have our last minute food plots you can check out at Pure Wildlife Blends. We have a lot of different seed varieties, especially our fall power greens. We have ways to establish clover this time of year, rye, a lot of different goodies. We also have our client visits. We've already started scheduling for this year, December through next August. So there's 5 of us going to client properties. Make sure you check that out. And then finally, our books and web classes. They're great Christmas presents this time of year is when they really start to sell. So really appreciate you watching. Just check out Whitetail Habitat Solutions, or for this food plot seed company, purewildlifeblends.com. Thank you.